The topic of my paper, my book that I'm writing, is servant leadership in Islam. Specifically, the idea of, first, that it's a more Christian-centric idea. Servant leadership sort of became from Christianity. Is it applicable to Islam? And if so, then is Gülen and the Hoji Effendi and the Hizmet Movement, is that a good depiction of servant leadership? I'm going to advance. So the first thing we have is that we have a scholarly problem with this topic of servant leadership because it is almost exclusively a Christian concept. It was created by Robert Greenleaf back in the 70s. He wrote this book about servant leadership. And since that time, it has been expounded on by chiefly Christian writers, either as a way of running the church, the leadership in the church, or as a way of business, Christian businessmen operating in servant leadership. His idea was that if you are a leader, seen as a leader in your community, and you then care more about your people than you do about yourself, then you could become a servant leadership. You'd come on with the word just, I've got jet lag. Okay. So you would have these character traits that are seen to be by servant leaders. So we have the scholarly problem where, most of the writing is about Christian authors. So we went into this saying, okay, so is servant leadership universal? Does it expand past Christianity? And does it specifically exist in Islam? And then as it does, how does Gülen and the movement compare to that established, all of that scholarly work that sort of establishes this framework of what a servant leadership looks like? And so there has been a little bit of scholarly work in servant leadership in Islam, but it's mostly just Quranic based, where they're just talking about the various traits and where it's found in the Quran, or they are discussing business from a business standpoint. And so let's talk just for a second about what servant leadership is. It really is that you have this, it has to be this inner core inside of you. I kind of don't accept the notion that it's something that can be learned, because I think if you're learning to be a servant leadership, it's not coming from your heart. So I think it has to be within you first. And then they really concentrate on meeting the needs of others rather than their own. So those others might be constituents, they might be employees, they might be your customers, depending upon what aspect you're coming from. And in this case, we would talk about Hizmet, of course, in serving others. We would have the followers of Gülen, who are, of course, he prioritized his followers over himself. And then, of course, then we have the prioritization of society and humanity and the needs of society over his own needs. So I'm preaching to the choir here. Everyone knows Hoji Effendi was almost certainly a servant leader, because that's the core of who he was, this love, service of others before yourself as a worship of God. And in Christianity, of course, we start with Jesus, peace be upon him, because, he washed the disciples' feet. He talked about, others have to increase and you have to decrease. And then, of course, he always met the needs of others before he gave his sermons. So he, in ways, servant leadership, and that is Gülen's way as well, because he is meeting the needs of others. The education, the hospitals, the humanitarian relief, the water wells that we do in places, all of those things, you're meeting their physical, intellectual needs, and then there's no proselytizing about it. It's not a conversion, which is unfortunately almost inherent in other faiths' good works. Other faiths have organizations like Hizmet in that they do good works, but they almost exclusively do it for the purposes of conversion, which is antithesis to Hizmet's way of doing it. The Quran specifically talks about what leadership is. It talks about justice and humility. Obviously, humility could have been Gülen's middle name instead of Fethullah. Compassion, trustworthiness, the piousness, the love of Allah, the surrender to Allah, and charity, which of course certainly depicts Hizmet. So I have this analytical framework. So we have, on the Christianity side, we have like Jesus and Abraham and Moses. We have those examples of people who served, who led their people, but sort of from behind. But then we have, in Islam, we have the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And then we have, the first caliphs. We have the first, the righteous ones. We have the people who followed him, his companions. We have those people to look to who specifically had those traits when they came into leadership. And then, of course, we have Gülen and the people that have since followed him. And so there are just these traits, this honesty and trustworthiness and integrity from your core, not because you learned it and you're doing it because it will make you look good. We have this idea of charity and compassion, but this idea of seeking lifelong learning. Justice and respect for others, but as you can see at the bottom of the slide, it says love. All the faiths say we're supposed to love our neighbors, our community, and Gülen and Hizmet, love is a verb. In Hizmet, it's a verb. It's not something we are, it's something we do. And that's what brought me to Hizmet was, I met these people who said they wanted world peace, and everyone wants world peace. Even Miss America, when you stick the microphone in her face, she says, I want world peace. Okay, but you don't do anything about it. And so I came to Hizmet very skeptical, but these people who were going to do world peace, and then I started seeing the actions that met the words, these genuine people who had followed this man, and some things that he had to say that were so profound that it influenced them, and by contrast, and it influenced us all, because we were not Turkish, we were not Muslim, but we came to Hizmet because we saw in him and in our fellow Hizmet people this difference that we don't find in other things. So of course, Gülen never wanted to be a leader. I remember sitting there with him, and I accidentally said the Gülen movement. And he was, well, first of all, he called me the funny one. And of course he said it in Turkish, and I never, they said that's what it meant, but, I'm not so sure. But he would call me the funny one. But he never wanted to be the leader. He never wanted to be the movement. And so that is the key of servant leadership, is that it is not about you. It's not about the house that you live in, the congregation that you have, the plane that you fly in. None of that stuff attached to Gülen. I mean, he was living in that little room with, very, very few possessions. He didn't want anything. He didn't need anything that he did not have. And he eschewed all of that. So this genuine care and concern for others that he just spoke about. And you would think that would not be revolutionary, but it was. And he was, and his teachings are, because the teachings didn't die with him. Even though we've lost him, we have not lost what he put into our hearts. And of course, Hizmet is that. One of the key aspects to servant leadership that I have found in Christianity and in Islam, and then of course in Hizmet, is this idea that we raise up the next generation. So Ibrahim is here he's now in Uganda. So he's not Turkish, okay? He grew up in a Hizmet school, and then he grew up in that influence, the teachings, and he became principal of the school. the servant leader raises up servant leaders. And so that, of course, was typical of Gülen. He didn't say, I want. He would say, we want. He would consult with his companions and get consensus on what would be good. And he might give a suggestion, but then people would run with it and make it something. But he never said, you must, or he just told people what he thought, and if they liked it, they would go do it. And so that's one of the things with Hizmet, is this raising up of the next generation and the next generation and the next generation of people who are now going to continue to take over the institutions. And Hizmet itself inevitably will become less Turkish and even less Muslim, because there will be more and more and more people who are raising up in their own faith traditions that who bring in the teachings of Gülen and then take action upon it. So, obviously we talk about peace and human rights, and we talk about freedom, democracy. That was very, very big with Gülen, is democracy and the freedoms that people enjoy, and that we're going to bring on to the next generation, and we're going to take some of these places where they don't know these things, and we're going to bring it in through education, having children go to school together so that they grow up not fighting each other. Their parents have to talk to each other because the kids are talking to each other, and so we have that. So that's my talk. Obviously the book will be much longer, and inshallah, people will read it. But that's the core of servant leadership, just beyond your own ego to something greater than yourself, in worship of something greater than yourself, and that is universal. And there's no better example than Hoca Effendi and the movement that grew up around him. So, Hizmet, service. Thank you.